All right. Welcome, Ari Zerner.
Thank you, Matt. Nice to be here.
Yep. So everyone, this is... Ari, do you want to introduce yourself a bit? Give a little background?
Sure. So, yeah, I'm a purple wizard, is how one might know me. I moved to Berkeley pretty recently. I'm striving to build community here. I'm often described as a hippie rationalist. So that's a bit about me.
Yeah, living in like a Berkeley commune type thing.
I wouldn't quite say commune, but it's not far off.
That's what we're seeing in the background right now, right? Your room in the group house.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, hold on. Let me add a little bit of height to this thing. Actually, if you have any books, you could prop up, just so it's like a little bit higher up.
Check this out.
Oh, a standing desk. Classy. Okay. So for listeners, Ari and I are friends. I think we've known each other, it's got to be 2 or 3 years.
June 2024, so it's been coming up on 2 years.
And we met at Lighthaven, the rationalist mecca. And Ari was actually one of the few to have the distinction of being at both of the love symposiums. And in fact, not only at both of them, you're like in the picture on the New York Times page for the love symposium. I don't know if you saw that.
Yep, in my very identifiable purple cape.
Purple cape. And you, though your presence at the love symposium, it was interesting. What did you think of it both years?
Yeah, I thought it was a pretty fun event. I think there were some really interesting talks. As usual, a lot of the good stuff was in the sidetrack conversations.
Were there any interesting, or did you listen to the New York Times Daily episode?
No, I haven't yet.
Did you read any of the New York Times article?
I did. It was a while back. I don't remember it super well, but yeah.
Okay.
I remember scanning through it to see if the wrestling got mentioned, and I was sad to see it didn't, especially because the New York Times journalist actually called me to ask about the wrestling.
Called you?
Yeah.
Wait, how'd this go?
So it was just a short call where she's like, so I heard there was wrestling at the Love Symposium. You were one of the people in that, right? And I was like, yep. And she was like, so how did that get started? And, how were you thinking about it, basically? And so we just had a short chat, maybe like 10 minutes about that. Didn't make it into the article.
It made it into the Daily, though, into the podcast episode.
Glad to hear.
Yeah, because apparently there was another group in New York City who was doing wrestling as well. In New York City, there was like a wrestling, like people would just go up to each other, and if you saw someone at this like singles mixer who you were attracted to, you had to challenge them to a wrestle, basically.
Well, yeah, I think I saw something about that event on Twitter. Seemed really fun.
Okay, so you're like not only a wrestler, but like a good wrestler, like more competent than I'd say at least 90% of men, maybe could be even in the top 1%.
I've got a good instinct for it. If I go up against anyone with any training, I get utterly whooped. But
yeah,
I'm like casual good at wrestling.
Yeah, you like, yeah, certainly like out of 10 randomly selected similar weight guys, do you think you come out first or second, maybe?
Yeah, I think probably.
Okay. So what do you think about, think back to all the women you've had, anarchic dyads with. Would you wrestle any of them? Do you think that'd be a good opener?
Let's see. So I'd definitely enjoy it. I think, yeah.
Do you think that would work?
I think that would definitely work for some women. I've actually I wrote a little something that I haven't published publicly yet, but I've shared with this group chat I'm in, comparing wrestling to sex and how the dynamics for those are kind of similar for me, and how I enjoy wrestling in some ways that I think I can learn to enjoy sex more in similar ways. Anyway, so I shared that piece of writing, and one of the women in this group chat said, "Hey, next time we're in the same city, please subdue me." So that was pretty fun.
Oh, can you give us some of the points from that blog article?
Yeah, let me actually just pull it up real quick and read off the headers. Yeah, so I talked about presence, where when I wrestle, I'm fully in the moment, whereas I don't quite have that yet with sex. I still get kind of caught up in sort of stories about what I'm doing. I've got attunement without altruism. So in both, I'm very focused on the other person and reading what's going on with them. But then for wrestling, that's about my own goals. And then I think I want to do a little more of that in sex, rather than being overly focused on the other person. Obviously, I don't want to be none focused on the other person, but I think it would be good to move towards, while staying aware, being, a little more self-focused. And then the other thing I wrote about is competition, where I have a very strong competitive drive, and I think there would be some fun ways to incorporate this into sex that I haven't really been exploring.
Okay, what are ways you can incorporate competitive sexuality that doesn't involve being interested in the other person's goals rather than your own? Because that seems like the main competition is like basically trying to maximize their goals, their utility.
So I've heard from some people who have thought a lot about what makes good sex that you really want to be like 80-20, where each person is 80% focused on their own pleasure in sex. I've heard this makes really good sex because it's just easier to know what's going on in yourself than what's going on in another person. And so you want to be optimizing mostly for the thing that you have the most direct information and control about. And if both people are doing this, then at that boundary, it creates a really good time for both people. You don't want to be totally self-absorbed. You want to have a little bit of that interface of like checking in, making sure you know what's going on with the other person. But
yeah. My question though is that you said you want to incorporate competitive elements into it, but the only competitive element I've ever heard to sex is either, I guess the three I can think of is being able to achieve the sex, number one, with a partner that is like desirable and difficult to like attain sex with. Secondly, you would have how long you can last. But how long you can last is ostensibly downstream of the final goal, which is like maximizing their pleasure, making her come a lot. But that seems entirely focused on her goals. Even if it's like your goal, it's like that's ostensibly her goal. So I don't see the competitive aspect during sex that is not more altruistic towards the other person rather than focused on yourself.
Yeah, so I'll get to that in a moment. Quick tangent though, the focus on lasting a long time is something that I'm trying to move away from. I think that's one of those stories that I was talking about, where it kind of takes me out of just the attention of being in the moment. Yeah, so a couple things I wrote about for competitive drive is like, power dynamics in a kink sense have that sense of competition of like, if one person is taking power over the other, that feels satisfying to my competitive drive. And that's a nice one because a lot of people do want to be on the other side of that where they're being dominated. And so then
that's just
a question
wrestling.
of matching. Well, I don't know. There's a lot of different ways to do power dynamics, and wrestling is one of them.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I wrote about that I think is going to take a little more work to figure out how to set up is I like the tension of competition where you don't actually know who's going to come out on top. Like you can have a negotiated power dynamic, and that does seem fun. But I want to find ways to have a power dynamic that sort of emerges where it's not clear at the beginning who's going to end up holding the power. So some kind of, like one concrete thing I wrote about here is like do some kind of actual competition, and then the winner of the competition gets to dominate in bed.
Okay, yeah. Because I was wondering how you subvert, without just having sex with other men, how you subvert the power dynamic physically. So you have some prearranged rule, and like the competition is something you agree to.
Mm-hmm.
I think I actually have maybe done stuff like that as well, where like there's some competition that's like ostensibly fair, and then the winner gets to like tell the loser what to do.
Mm-hmm.
There was this guy. There's this guy in Japan, Goki Muramoto, who I met at a conference, and he said that he wanted to make a game based on the emotion of like the embarrassment from rejection, and he wanted to make a dating app where you just get rejected all day, almost like if Omegle, but just like the feeling of getting rejected. And yeah, it also feels like that, like willingly making it where you could be dominated by someone else is also like, especially in a variable reward payoff, is maybe an underexplored emotion.
I think so. I've thought about throwing a party like that game where, the theme of the party is just get rejected as much as possible. And
Wow.
you just have to make like outlandish requests.
Huh, that's cool. Yeah, a whole party where you're exploring rejection. Okay, it feels like this is a good segue then into relationship anarchy, which is like if we're having all these different dynamics. What am I thinking? How about first, you sent me the blog post on relationship anarchy. I'll link to it. What? Yeah. Okay. The thing I wanted to say is this seems like what you're very interested in is exploring the latent space of possible experiences you could have in a relationship.
Yeah,
And,
I think that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, because that's what I'm hearing is you're like, oh, what a fun, I could like explore a new dynamic of like I'm getting dominated because of some game. So you feel that like people are unnecessarily constrained by cultural. Is it? We can get into like cultural versus innate, but like they're necessarily constrained in their view of what are the possible affordances in a relationship, and so you advocate for relationship anarchy. So first, do you want to like say anything about that?
Sure. Yeah, so I will say, I guess I do advocate a little. Mostly, I think relationship anarchy is very right for me and probably some other people. I don't take the stance that it's the right thing for everyone. And like you said, we can get into culture versus innate later. But yeah, I think, I've considered myself non-monogamous for my entire, since I became a sexual being, pretty much.
When did you become a sexual being, do you think?
I think around age 13, and then at age like 14, I heard about non-monogamy, and I'm just like, yeah, that makes sense. I'm going to do that.
Huh. Okay, tell me a little bit about that period when you first thought you were a sexual being, the lead up to it because I think other people maybe become sexual slightly younger than that. 13 seems like a little late, if anything to me. I feel like the number is usually like somewhere between 10 and 12. 13, 14 also is like valid. It's not like too crazy. But the lead up to 13 and then the year from 13 to 14, what were your thoughts? And then when you encountered, yeah.
That's going to be a tough one. Let me try to dig back into this hazy memory. So I definitely have a sense that I was getting some sexual education before I actually started having sexual feelings, so I kind of knew what to expect. And one day I started masturbating, and I'm like, oh, so that's what that's about.
At 13,
if I recall correctly, yeah.
okay. And before that, did you notice? I mean, other classmates must have already been somewhat interested in sex by then. Did you have any thoughts on that? Did you take any notice of that?
Ah, maybe. I don't really remember. Like, nothing stands out in my memory that way. I definitely uh, recall having a sense of, like, feeling a little behind on understanding. Like, I definitely, had sex for the first time later than a lot of my peers. And I think that goes hand in hand with what you're saying about, becoming a sexual being on the late side. I've always been, I think, a little bit of a late bloomer in this area.
13 is not crazy late, but I think for me it was closer to early 12. Could have been late 11 and a half. Though I did, recently I was in Florence and Rome on a trip, and I was reminded that my grandma had taken me there when I was 10, and that I had seen all these statues, these Greek, Roman, and Renaissance statues, and I realized that there was a whole confusion in my childhood that I'd had about, just a side tangent on my sexual budding, where I grew up Methodist, like a liberal Methodist church, but in Ohio, a bit of a balance. But my grandma had taken me at age 10, before any sexual education at all, from the church, from school, from anything, to see these statues. And these are the statues that our forebears of civilization created. Literally the Greeks, the Romans, and the Renaissance people. Those are like the big three of, like, the only other one you have left is like the Enlightenment and maybe the Founding Fathers. And so, like, these people had statues just showing these really hot looking men, completely naked, 10 feet tall in the town square with their uncircumcised dicks just displaying to the world. And they showed, women being groped and men wrestling. And so when people told me, these are the creators of civilization, and and then, like, they would say, oh, we have traditional beliefs in sexuality. I mean, that's what tradition is, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like the Greeks, the Romans, and the Renaissance is tradition. And so I was always extremely confused growing up how people would tell me, I'm very into, like, they're like, oh, we're into traditional values around sex, and then they say, and that means no being naked and kissing boys, and I'm like, that
Hmm.
seems like one of the major activities in antiquity. They wouldn't make so many statues of it if it wasn't
Yeah,
something they
right?
were
It's like,
doing a
who
lot.
is tradition?
Yeah, and so
Yeah, I do feel like our society is in a weird sort of bubble of sexual repression, and I'm no historian, but my understanding is that's kind of downstream of Victorian England. Kind of had this, like, Puritan uh, wave that's sort of still carrying through in our society, and we're, like, finally starting to break out of it downstream of the free love movement of the '60s.
yeah, I think some of it is due to romanticism as well. Um, Courting rituals where people tried to do courting rituals similar to the upper class. That's why our wedding ceremonies look like banquets where, like, a king and queen are getting united. A giant
Mm-hmm.
table. Yeah, a lot of there's a lot that goes into it. Maybe no time for, like, a massive history deep dive, but things are different than, like, they traditionally were. And so I was always confused by that. And so then by the time I got to sex ed and people were like, you either like boys or you either like women and you're normal, or you're like this really unfortunate fringe group and you like other men, and, like, you might also go to hell. And I was just like, this is not what I learned in, like, Roman history.
And that's very different from my own sex ed experience growing up in, like, the Boston suburbs, where it's just
Yeah.
like, there's all different kinds of people and everyone's okay.
Okay. So yeah, what was the messaging there?
Yeah. Yeah. So again, like, I don't have super detailed memories of this time, but I think it was just like, they taught us about different sexualities, and they're like, everyone's valid, no one is worse because of who they're attracted to. Uh, you know, and that was just like in between all the stuff about, like, be careful of STDs and pregnancy, and I think one time we did have a condom demonstration with, like, a cucumber or whatever.
Was there still messaging though that like there is such a thing as a person who's just straight and like most people are that?
Uh, I mean, I think definitely there was messaging of like some people are straight, some people are gay, some people are bi. I
Okay.
don't know if it went into like numbers of what most people are.
Yeah, I think the message I'd heard a lot was just like uh, the majority of people are straight, and like that's just like a default. Whereas I don't think that's how like the ancients would have thought about it at all.
Yeah,
They
it is
clearly
interesting
like
how
seeing
different
naked men.
societies do different categorization of sexuality,
Yeah.
right? Like, I think the Romans had, I forget where I've heard this, so grains of salt, but they had the idea that like having sex with women was a man's duty, whereas having sex with men was for fun, which
I think
is
the
just
Spartans definitely had that. Yeah.
yeah, so different from how we think of it today.
Um, okay, so people clicked on this to hear about the philosophy of relationship anarchy. Um, did you get a chance to go through um, the blog post again? Have you looked at that?
Yeah, so I wanted to take that as a starting point because it does match pretty closely with how I think about relationship anarchy, where
Okay, let's.
basically it's like, yeah, we're all adults here. We all want things, and I think it's good to actually consider for ourselves what we want, how we want to relate to people, rather than try to take this sort of one size fits all mold, or even a one size fits many mold, right? Like, one model is you have monogamy or polyamory, and those are the two ways to do things. And I think that is still, way too restrictive. There's a lot of different ways a relationship can look, and different people are going to thrive best in a wide variety of different structures. And so I think relationship anarchy just takes as a starting point that you know it's a blank slate. You're totally free to do anything, and then you can decide you know what do you want to do, and then find someone else who wants to do that with you. And I think from that baseline, you can kind of converge on a lot of the things that are the standard structures, or you can go off in a different direction. So I think
Okay, what are some of the standard structures that most commonly end up being renegotiated in your experience?
I'm not sure what you mean by renegotiated here.
So, what I'm understanding is relationship anarchy is advocacy for using non-standard contracts, almost like negotiating your own prenup relationally, rather than
Gotcha.
using
Yeah.
what the government law or in our case cultural law is. So, what are the common prenup is like, no, I'm not going to do a 50-50 split of assets. Like, what do you think are the common okay, let's put it this way. I'm gonna like pair you off with a woman right now, and she's a very normal person with normal standard relationship views of like what everyone's obligations are. What do you predict in the first month will find suffocating or like a contractual obligation that you don't want to follow?
Yeah, so the one that immediately jumps out to me is exclusivity, right? This idea that if I'm in this relationship with her, it's constraining how I can relate to everyone else in the world. So it's like sexually and emotionally, there's a lot of default expectations of, you know, you're not going to develop things with other people in those areas if you're right. It's sort of like this exclusivity contract, like Coke has with restaurants or something, where it's like you can't have Pepsi products if you're serving Coke.
Do you think
Uh,
there's any value to that for at
yeah,
least some people?
I think for a lot of people that works. My kind of cheeky way to put this is monogamy is a fine kink. It's just not my kink.
And what is the kink if you had to describe it in kind of a salacious way?
Yeah, so it's this kind of 24/7 mutual power dynamic thing where, each person is exercising control over what the other can do with other people.
Wow, that's Can we get an even a second like salacious description of what your view is on monogamy as a kink?
Yeah, I think it kind of touches on ownership in this. It's usually mutual, so it doesn't map quite cleanly onto usual ownership. But I think both people are kind of making an ownership claim on the other of like, I own your sexuality, it's mine. You can't share it with other people, and you know, like it's it's the default cultural assumption, but it really does embed quite a lot in that assumption, right?
Yeah. Wow, yeah, it is quite an interesting kink when you put it that way. That it's kind of a dom ownership kink 24/7.
Mm-hmm.
I guess you must like be able to easily steel man like the evolutionary arguments for why you'd have that kink.
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely does contribute to some stability in society, right? Like, you look at something like uh, Gail Shapley stable matching, and if everyone subscribes to monogamy, then you have people pair off, and then there's a sense of like, okay, we've got our matches, we know where things stand, it's not going to be changing around a bunch. Whereas I think in, especially in relationship anarchy, but also in non-monogamy more generally, there's a lot more fluidity. You don't always know how people are relating. It changes a lot more often because you don't have this strict container around a relationship as much.
So
I
you
think,
think, go ahead.
um, yeah, you sent me one
I had
possible
some
question that
I
was,
had some gotchas, yeah, or at least some pointed questions.
yeah,
Um,
what was the one I was trying to think of here? Oh, yeah, you asked me, in what ways is sex inherently more important than other activities?
yeah, because the blog
And
article said the opposite, that sex is just another activity no more important than other ones.
yeah, and I think I used to try to take that position, but to answer that question, I would say sex has some like very powerful primal impacts on emotional bonding between people, right? Like if you have sex with someone, that is going to change both of you, and I think that's a powerful force that we don't want to take lightly. Unless we set up a really careful container around taking it lightly, which can be done but doesn't happen by default.
Yeah, that in my opinion is maybe the strongest argument for less relationship anarchy as a default is that, and I think being a millennial who went through the kind of like hookup culture phase of like, let's say it was like maybe 2004 to 2000, I don't know, 13, 14, or just everyone's hooking up with everyone a lot. A lot of people got, as they say, ran through. They got like these attachment pairings that were one night stands, and you release all this oxytocin, all this like all these hormones that really make you bond deeply. Um, and it can kind of degrade your ability to bond deeply with single individuals if you've experienced that with like just too many random people in a non-meaningful way.
So
Have you ever had a partner make this argument to you about why you should be their sex kink monogamous slave?
I really haven't had partners argue that I should be monogamous for the most part. I had one partner who, definitely was, definitely wanted to be monogamous, and the way we resolved that is, we tried a couple of different compromise positions, and then after a few months, we're like, okay, we can't make this work, we're breaking up. And then after that, I was just like, hard rule, if someone wants monogamy, I'm not going to date them. So
What
I
if they
haven't
want
had
to?
a,
Yeah. Okay, monogamy is a kink about mutual ownership over one's sexuality. Um, are you into any mutual ownership kinks over something other than sexuality?
not really. Uh, I've got a strong libertarian streak, always have. So I certainly don't want to be owned, and to a lesser degree, but still quite a bit, I would feel uncomfortable exerting ownership over another person. I think the closest thing I've come to on that is I get pretty upset if I'm watching a TV show with someone else and they start watching it with someone that feels like a bit of a betrayal.
Yeah, so that's like a social norm around you're supposed to be going through a journey with them of experience, like a hero's arc, a narrative journey. So in monogamy, you could also have that arc, I guess, and it's like your personal life, and they want to be the exclusive romantic partner in your personal narrative during the time period they're with you. Is like maybe part of the idea.
Yeah, and I
Like,
think, like I said, monogamy does work well for a lot of people, and I think that's a solid part of why. I think for me, it's just like, I think romance is too good to limit it like that in my life. It's really important to me that I have the freedom to develop my relationship with each individual person as is natural for that relationship. I would feel very limited if someone were telling me how I could, you know, relate to someone else.
okay. Um, okay, number one, with the changes in technology that are coming, and I think we're probably on a at least somewhat similar page to each other.
Sounds
Um,
right.
what do you think? So like right now, I'm guessing your model of the world is that like with some noise and some like randomness, the cultures around different social behaviors are somewhat downstream of just like the technological affordances. Um, Even now, like the or even like maybe like romanticism versus what came before, and like even now what's happening. Like the lower birth rate is probably not as much culture as it is like techno capital changes.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, my
what do you think?
cheeky
Yeah.
uh, one thing I like to say about the low birth rate is humans don't breed in captivity.
They only masturbate, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
um, you know, so, but yeah, no, absolutely. Technology is a huge factor on culture. Like, I think, a lot of modern sexual and romantic culture is downstream of condoms and birth control and STD testing, right? Where, back in Victorian times, if you tried to do free love, you'd just die of syphilis, and then,
Wow. Yeah, it was about hygiene as well, I guess.
hmm so
Okay. So given the technological changes coming, um, do you think this will lead, in what ways will this lead to more relationship anarchy? Do you imagine as like a stable attractor point for society? And what do you think the trade-offs are there? Like, what will we be experiencing 15 years from now relationally that we hadn't before, and what will we no longer experience?
think about that one for a moment. Uh, in the meantime, I will comment. I do think relationship anarchy is a little bit of a luxury belief, which I think you're familiar with the term,
Yeah.
where, relationship anarchy works great for me because, you know, I've got pretty solid like emotional processing skills and introspection, and I can, you know, be like, okay, what actually does work for me? How am I different from other people? And I think not everyone can pull this off. I think a lot of people, if you say, here's a blank slate, figure out how to fill it, they're really going to flounder and maybe go off and do something that hurts them quite a bit. And so I think it is good that we have, you know, one or more templates for people to follow.
Did
But
you
yeah, so
ever did you debate anyone, including maybe your parents at age like 14 or 15, about this topic? And what were some of the things that were brought up?
I must have. I don't think I debated my parents about this. I think they've always been very chill and accepting. I don't
I mean,
remember
did you
any
ever have a
debates I
moment
had.
where you like laid it out for a person, like, I do this, you do that, and I think my way is like could be superior? Or like,
Probably,
did you
yeah.
point blank
So
tell them, yeah, like you must have bad emotional processing abilities if you're unable
I
to do
don't think
this.
I don't think I ever did that. I think, I've had too much social grace to say something like that.
Yeah.
One argument that I've pulled out a lot, and I forget the debate context of this, but I remember, rehashing this over and over again. It's like, it would be really weird if you had a friend and they said you can't have any other friends, right? And so then I just take
Some
that
friends
and
are like
apply it
that
to
though.
partners. Yeah, and I think you really want to avoid a friend like that.
That's a kink. Oh yeah. It's a kind of kink, a social kink. Huh. That's
And
interesting.
so, then I just take that logic and I'm like, okay, so why is this different for partners and lovers? Why do we automatically accept that? Uh, and, there are some decent answers here for why, as a culture, monogamy is largely the default. Although, hang on. I'm going to put a seed in for a tangent here and then move off of it. It is
Okay.
interesting, like, in my current community, it's a lot less the case that monogamy is the default. Like in certain parts of my circles, it's kind of just assumed that people are some flavor of non-monogamous, and it's really interesting to see, you know, how that changes the culture of like how you interact with people. But we've got a couple things on the stack here. So there's like, how's technology going to affect culture going forward? There was like, how have I debated with people? Not a
Do
debate. I do
you
have this one very clear memory of talking to my biology teacher about polyamory, and she was like, "Huh, back in my day, we called that relationship anarchy." And I was like, "Oh yeah, that's another good term."
hmm. Oh, so that was that your first time hearing the term?
I don't think so, because I think in this memory, I was like, "Oh yeah, I've also heard that," and you know, I was like, there's some nuanced differences, but it was pretty funny to hear, because she was like this old lady teaching biology, and she was just like, "Oh yes, back in the day."
So this woman I was talking to today about this interview, she was curious about because I told her like, what would you want to know about someone like this? And you have to imagine people watching are trying to like render in their mind a picture of who you are. You're sitting in your Berkeley rationalist group house, surrounded by other people who are like have all sorts of weird combinations of sexual interest and relational dynamics. Um, and I think her question was like, does that work for you? Does that actually achieve the goals you're looking for? And does that achieve the goals that your partners are looking for? And like, what are some of your KPIs relationally? And like, are you meeting them versus if you like, you know, didn't have some of the rules you have or non rules?
So, an interesting question. It's a little theoretical because I am single at the moment.
Yeah.
Uh, so
You
my
can
last,
also, not only for you, but like other people as well.
yeah, I definitely feel like it's working for people around me. I look around at the people I know who have multiple partners, and they seem very happy and thriving. They're always posting cute stories about, you know, their boyfriends talking to each other about whatever. Um, and I think it's really
Oh,
cute to see.
wait, can you give us like just a little, couple minute tangent on like some of the anecdotes from that? Because I bet that's a world some people want to hear about. Like, um, that someone having multiple boyfriends who talk to each other about that partner. Like, I don't even think I've really experienced that. Despite being like in those communities, never really got like involved in hearing about that.
Uh,
The polydrama.
yeah. So I think it's pretty low drama in my communities. I hear rumors of other circles where there's a ton of drama around poly, and I'm like, ooh, glad that's not me. Um, but I think around here it's all very friendly. Everyone's kind of collaborating to have a good time, and you get these stories of like, people like coordinating dates. Like when one partner's out of town, you just like tag in basically, uh, or like So there's this one woman I know who goes by Pandora on Twitter, and she posts a lot of cute stories about her boyfriends collaborating. So like, one just like little thing she said recently is like, pro tip for sleepy girlfriends: go on a road trip with at least two boyfriends so they can trade off driving while you sleep in the back seat. Uh, and then, there's been bigger stuff where like, um, there will be like the boyfriends in a group chat, planning some elaborate thing. There's, she's blogged some about this. It's interesting how you get like project management, basically. I think this is a pretty extreme example. I think, not everyone who's poly is this, you know, entwined and collaborative and like planning at large scale. A lot of it is just like, imagine like a group of friends and then a bunch of them love each other / are having sex with each other.
Have you seen anyone do it wrong, in your opinion?
Uh, I don't know if I've personally seen it. I've definitely, heard tales secondhand of people doing it wrong. Uh, where like, let's see, what are some of the big failure modes? I think, a really big thing is like if people's expectations aren't on the same page, then you've got a lot of opportunities for conflict, right? Like, uh, one way that I think is decently common from what I've heard that I want to say is doing it wrong, and again, my high level stance is like people do lots of things. If it works for them, great. But one thing that I certainly would not do, and I think has a high chance of failure, is people will say like you can have sex with other people, but don't form romantic attachments to them. And I think that's kind of just doomed to failure. Like we were talking about, sex is very powerful. I think people don't get to control their feelings. You can control your actions, but I think any structure where you're trying to say you're not allowed to feel a certain way is kind of, in my book, doing it wrong.
I guess a lot of people have this view of relationships like I'm gonna find a person, get married, maybe or maybe not have a kid, and we kind of that's my family now, and I have in-laws, and so they see that as a safe harbor to go towards. And I feel like I've seen that a lot too, even though, there's you could construct a similar narrative for a career, which
Hmm.
I've completely rejected as like a career narrative. Do you think there's like a certain degree of cowardice where people need to follow this narrative structure? And do you feel uncowardly where you don't have any of this fear of like that you're off track of some narrative? And if so, what kind of fantasies or dreams do you have about what your future relational outcomes will look like? What if anything are you striving for or aspiring to?
So I think it's rude to call it cowardice, but yeah, I think there is a bit of that. If you're staying on the beaten path, you're afraid to like go into the woods and forge your own trail. I think that drives a lot of people this way. And I really like the career analogy here because, yeah, in both cases, there's sort of this standard progression. We've got this term, the relationship escalator, which is this, meet someone, go on some dates, at some point decide you're exclusive, and then you keep dating, and eventually you get engaged and married and maybe have kids. And then you've got the standard escalator. And I think, yeah, like relationship anarchy says you can just get off this path at any point. Uh, or also, you can kind of skip some steps, which I think is less common. But, I think I have heard of like platonic marriages where people, do the marriage part without the, dating and sex part. And they're like, yeah, this just makes sense as a legal logistic structure for us. Uh, so, you can kind of just like pick and choose what you want with, you don't have to be on this track.
So
But yeah, I think in the way that you've rejected the sort of career escalator, I've similarly rejected the relationship escalator.
It's so maybe a different framing then is yeah, relationship anarchy as a basis, but then relationship entrepreneurship as an aspiration.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great term.
Yeah, where you actually it's not that you're not trying to succeed at interesting, ambitious goals in relationships, but that you have that you're trying to create new outcomes and new configurations that people haven't thought of to like achieve similar goals that the well-trodden paths were originally constructed to achieve. Because I mean, there must have been a time when there was a time, right, when romanticism wasn't a thing. There was a time, maybe even when traditional marriages weren't a thing, and like those were constructed as entrepreneurial paths to
Hmm.
interesting relationship outcomes. Someone was like, oh, I'm gonna have a kink where we own each other, and that was like an enterprising idea in the relationship area, and you just want to keep innovating on that.
Yeah, and I think, you know, in both career and relationships, my stance is kind of like I'm gonna lean into this thing of, being a human animal in this crazy world and just see like, okay, where does my intuition want to lead me? Like really following this sort of, I've gotten a lot more, I guess, woo or spiritual over the last several years. Uh, and I think, for me, a lot of relationship anarchy is about having the freedom to do full expression, right? If I'm not conforming to this pre-existing template, then I can really explore, you know, all the various ways that my soul can connect with someone else's soul. Uh,
What are
which
some of the most valuable ways you've connected with other people's souls? Do you have like some highlights uh, that you felt?
so like, okay, in my last quote serious relationship, we definitely got to a point where we could pretty reliably finish each other's sentences. We just very deeply knew each other, had these very integrated mutual modeling of each other. And I thought that was really nice. This sort of like almost cognitive melding. I think that was really beautiful. And then on the other side, you've got like, I've started going to play parties recently, and you've got these like little sparks of connection that don't have to lead anywhere, but they're still really beautiful. Like, I went to one where I wrestled with someone, and he was like, "Wow, I really didn't expect to be wrestling here. What a cool bit of novelty in my night." And so I was just like, sort of sharing an interest, broadening someone's horizons, and you've got this whole range here of like, I think connection is beautiful wherever it happens, regardless of how deep or long lasting.
You should check out those statues I mentioned from Florence, because there's like one where there's like two men wrestling, but then also one's kind of grabbing at the other's dick, and it's like it's only like maybe 35% sexual, but that's an interesting percent of like gay to have a man on man wrestling interaction be. Not 100%. I don't even. The statue didn't make me think that they probably had sex after, but it was like two men and like it was like 35% gay, which is like an interesting
Mm-hmm.
percent of gay to allow yourself to be. Because usually it's like under 10% or like over 90%.
Yeah, so I've got this meme I made that I like a lot. I keep referencing it. Have it at the start of that writing I was talking about earlier, where it's the Trinity diagram where it's like is not is not is not. And
Yeah.
it's like, so it's that, and then the three corners are dancing, fighting, and sex. Where obviously they're all different, but I do feel like they're all kind of the same thing. They're all just different ways of sort of attuning yourself to another person.
That's interesting. Okay, so I think we've covered relationship anarchy. We've rebranded it relationship entrepreneurship as an aspirational goal. Um, I think maybe the final thing I want to broach, especially since you were at the Love Symposium, is the relationship singularity, or at least my thoughts on um, new products that could help people in relationships. And you're maybe a very unique use case to talk to because I think a lot of people who are going to give us feedback on this are, relationship career escalator types. They have a very standard view of like, I'm trying to ride that escalator. How can you get me up the escalator quicker? If you look at, for example, one of our great friends of the show, sponsors even of our NeurIPS thing and sponsors of the Love Symposium, Keeper, which I love, and I love their goal. Their goal is definitely like escalatory. It's like get you married to have kids. It's like people who are just for sure they want to ride the escalator to like this outcome that is great. And in fact, they want to ride an escalator that kind of Disney sells you that you don't even usually get to, like most people don't even get to ride that escalator of like finding your actual soulmate, which is what they're kind of advertising. But I think most people want to just know, can you get me a soulmate? And like, it seems like you're actually much more into exploration. So in that case, let's lay out some of the premises. Actually, let's first, maybe since you've been to the symposiums, I don't know, if you're wrestling rather than listening to all the talks, what you understand the current ideas in the space to be of like new opportunities.
I will also say, I think marriage and kids is a great goal. I do want that for myself someday. I think, my marriage won't look like the standard marriage exactly, although I probably will borrow a lot of the tried and tested elements of it. Uh, but yeah, I also think Keeper is pretty cool. Um, but yeah, so to your question, like, what do I think the space looks like? Uh, so I definitely haven't been following it as closely as you have.
Yeah.
Uh, so, you might
Okay.
be better placed to comment here.
How we can
Uh,
start this is actually what apps, at what ways do you use technology, period, to facilitate your relational outcomes?
uh,
Dating apps,
so,
social media.
yeah. So one of the talks at the Love Symposium was about the Cuties app, which I thought was a great talk. I signed up for Cuties immediately at the end of that.
What
Um,
hooked you?
I think for me it was the community orientation. That like a lot of dating apps sort of put you in isolation. They're like, you're this floating profile. Here are these other floating profiles. You look at one, you say interested or not interested, and then you move along. Cuties has a very different model where it shows you a bunch of people. You probably already know a lot of them because it's focusing on these like small tight knit communities, and you can sort of scan through. People can endorse each other and comment on each other's profiles, and I think this is. So I have a pretty low view actually of dating apps in general, and I think Cuties is doing a lot better because I think this sort of community approach to finding relationships is it generally works better. Uh, I think it's not natural for humans to be so atomized the way that modern dating kind of pushes towards. I think traditionally you'd find a partner through your community, right? It'd be like you'd be going to the local dance, or your someone would introduce you to someone, and that way you already have like a bunch of this shared cultural context, have a lot of the same ideas, a lot of the same people. You have this starting place. And I think that, at least for me, and I think for a lot of people, is a much more comfortable way to date that I think is more likely to, find your soulmate than sort of plucking them out of the void. So, I mostly don't use the apps at all. Mostly I just try to build up community, and then sometimes, someone I know will be especially interesting, and, I'll maybe try to like pursue some romantic spark there.
So let's just play with a toy model of this, which is like you have a personality, a soul, whatever, something like that, and interactions with certain people um, do something to your soul or your personality. Kind of like could have like positive, negative valence, but it kind of moves it along a pathway, like maybe even a Markov chain, but like it moves it into like regions that are exploratory or desirable. Okay, that's like the first premise. Second one is like um, there's like different people who will move you into different regions with different probabilities. And so here's the third thing. Let's say you assign like some value to different regions that you'd like to explore. Maybe today, maybe this week, maybe just in general. Um, do you believe then that there exists like of all the whatever number of humans there are on Earth? Um, do you believe that there is like such a thing as like a fuzzily sorted list on planet Earth of people who will move you most reliably and with highest probability into the most interesting regions that you, as a relationship entrepreneur, want to move into? Do you think that
Yeah,
such a thing exists?
I think in principle that absolutely exists. And then, yeah, it is a technological question of can we actually generate this list with any kind of reliability? And of course, technology keeps marching forward. Eventually, we'll be able to do this. Uh,
And then
and
what would you do with such a list if it just got printed out right now and here's the names? You'd try to build a community, try to incorporate them into your community, or just DM them on Discord.
yeah, I think I would probably send a DM. Like, you know, I think depending on whether this list was common knowledge that it existed, I might just say like, "Hey, you're at the top of my list. You want to grab a drink?" Uh, or if it would be kind of weird to do that, then I think people don't do this enough. Where you can just DM anyone and be like, "Hey, do you want to grab a drink?" And maybe they say no, and then you're no worse off than you started. Uh, but yeah, I think it would be really cool to have a list like this. And I will say, like, you know, this thing of incorporating people into community is okay. So I host a weekly dessert night at my house where every week I make a different dessert and I just have some friends over to eat it together and hang out. And part of why I do this is I have this sort of default hook where if I want to get closer to someone, I say, "Hey, I've got this regular event. You should come by sometime."
Not
Right,
a
and then
date, but they're in
right,
your house, yeah,
yeah, it's a
late
lot
in the
lower
afternoon.
pressure,
Yeah.
and that is really just incorporating them into my community if I think someone's interesting. I can
Hmm.
just meet someone and be like, "Hey, you're really cool. You should come by and do this thing." And then, we get to talk a little more. They get to meet some of my other friends, see how I am embedded in my community.
They never bring up this technique in the Red Pill forums. Uh, that you could just be like the social host person. I guess probably they do mention a bit like have a wingman, but like this is a more gentle version, which is just like be the person with a lot of friends coming to your house for some regular event. Uh, yeah, that is a very good one. I'm surprised more people don't. That seems like a very strong technique for.
Yeah, it feels very powerful. Um, I think they don't bring it up on Red Pill forums because, Red Pill forums are more about complaining than solving problems, and I think a lot of Red Pill men don't have strong community, right? Like, if they already had strong community of the kind that you both build and use in this kind of hosting, then I think they wouldn't be on the Red Pill forum to begin with, for the most part.
What do
I
you
think
think they'd be doing instead?
hanging out, being normal, you know, like the archetypical thing here is like grilling, right? Where you're just
Yeah.
like, I'm like, I'm kind of normie coded in some ways, where, I do have a lot of weird ideas, but mostly what I want to do is just like hang out with my friends and have a good time. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, so I think, the Red Pill forums don't suggest this. because red pill men just mostly don't think of themselves as having a lot of friends, and that's a lot of why they're struggling to begin with.
Red pill forums are kind of like levels.fyi, but again for relationships rather than careers. Do you know levels.fyi?
Not really, no.
This is like FANG people who just obsessively post their total comp um, for any job and like just how to like career max, but none of them are happy. No, they're extremely miserable, but they're always posting how to career max. Like, oh, meta layoffs. Get a quick shift into Amazon for 2 years at this post, and then level 5 engineer, and like, but they're just like trying to like max out, and then like you see these posts where they're like talking about finance and careers, and then suddenly they're just crying like, I'm 32 and I've wasted my life. I have no fitness, and like no girlfriend, and like they just realize they've over optimized for something, and then
Yeah.
maybe red pillars are like the same, where they're attached to this game, the escalator game, and then they feel like they're losing it, and they just can't stop thinking about how they're losing that game.
Yeah, I think part of what's going on here is it's actually a really hard problem to figure out what you want in life. And so a lot of people fall into this trap of like picking some metric and being like, I'm going to do well at this metric, and that's what I want. It's kind of like, looking for your keys under a street light. It's like, that's where it's easy to see, but that doesn't mean that's where you'll find happiness. And I
Okay.
think, there's this hard introspective work of like figuring out what you genuinely want.
What do you think the red pillars are right about, and what do you think the blue pillars are right about? And then what are the black pillars right about, and then what are the white pillars right about?
You're going to have to give me a little more context on what those different groups are.
Okay, well, the red pillars, I think you know, right?
So the red pillars are like we're going to get really good at this game of hookup maxing and have lots of sex. Right, is that about it?
Yeah. Like, or, getting I think some of them, though, do just want a wife and kids. They just want to get to the top of the escalator. Um, but I think it's fair to say that a lot of them are young men also who just have a extremely active sex drive and want to maximize hookups as well.
All right,
What do you think they get right? And the blue pillars are like
Yeah,
a basic.
I can answer them one at a time. So
Yeah.
one thing I think the red pillars get right is just like it's possible to be, sexier and more attractive to women, and this kind of diverges from like the nice guy. I think like I got a lot of messaging about, avoid making women uncomfortable, in my sort of formative years, and it's taken me a lot of time and work to sort of deprogram from that. I think one thing the red pillars get right is it's often okay to risk making someone uncomfortable in the pursuit of, finding a match. And then what I think the red pillars get wrong there specifically is they are treating it as adversarial rather than a collaboration. A lot of the time. I think, one of the big revelations for me was, oh, women also want to have sex with men.
Oh, really? That was a revelation.
Yeah, I think, for a
What age
while I
did
had been
did you receive this revelation?
probably like early 20s. I had been thinking of it as sort of sex is something that men want and get women to give up, through, providing other kinds of value or whatever.
Interesting.
And yeah, so shifting from this is a negotiation to this is a collaboration was a big thing for me.
Okay. Yeah, I'll add like maybe like a red pill view is also the concept of Fisherian runaway selection. Stuff like deer antlers becoming oversized to the point of being dysfunctional because the women select for that, and like yeah, basically them saying that like two key points is like women will have preferences that are like revealed preferences different than the ones they state to you, which is kind of what you were saying there. Like you can make them a little uncomfortable, even though they'll tell you never make me uncomfortable. That's like a revealed preference different from the stated one.
And I think most women won't actually say that. That was just sort of a vocal minority putting that message
Yeah.
out there.
Interesting. Okay, and then the second one is that, and maybe this is more of a black pill view, but like that they actually have revealed preferences that are actively bad in some way. And this is kind of like that's maybe more of a black pill one. Could be red pill, but it's like that one criminal who was very attractive and then like started dating some celebrity, and then became a celebrity himself, and like yeah, women might have revealed preferences that are like actively bad, like zero sum or even negative sum for society, and maybe even negative sum for their own goals, but like for some reason they just have that preference. Maybe it's like evolutionary runaway itself. Maybe that the preference itself is like Fisherian runaway in a bad direction. So
Just a quick note here. I can hear you fine, but your video is frozen. I'm also curious whether Fisherian selection has a special affinity for you.
oh no. Okay, hold on. I have to. My phone died. That's what happened.
Gotcha.
Well, this is why we are working out the kinks on the first ever episode. Okay. Let's switch video to I'm locked in. Okay. Okay.
All right, and we're back.
All right, we're back. A little lower quality, but we'll go with it. Okay. So we covered the black pill and red pill people, what they may have got right. Blue pill
so
is...
hang on. Wait. I wanted to talk about the Fisherian selection thing a little bit. So I guess that might be a thing that there might be some harmful preferences, but I think we kind of have to just roll with it. I don't think we get to play this game at sort of top down. What would be the best for society thing? You can think of it as a market, and I think you got to just everyone's got to play the hand they're dealt. So if people have harmful preferences, I think that's unfortunate, but you just got to work with the preferences we have. I think sometimes preferences can be changed, but I take them as mostly immutable, and then it's just a question of, okay, how can we get people what they want?
Yeah, and there might be some societal positive externalities to having some people with negative some aspects to their preferences. Something to do with market inefficiencies being kind of like exploited actually helps make the market more robust.
I mean, there's some sense in which every loving relationship is exploiting a market inefficiency.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So a little seed again, which is like my main interest is in the concept of being able to moneyball mutual relationships, where essentially like an AI could find for you inefficiencies in the market and exploit those to get you and the other person like a very high positive sum outcome of like getting to meet each other, where you both essentially irrationally overvalue each other. And this is kind of my view of what friendship is as well, is like two people irrationally overvaluing each other, or at least like viewing, like liking interacting with another person way more than the typical person on the market enjoys interacting with that person.
Yeah, I don't think it's irrational. I think everyone has different preferences, and the point of a market is to match to preference.
Right. Completely not an irrational valuation. Yeah. It's just it's like idiosyncratic to them.
Yep. Yeah, idiosyncratic is a great word.
Okay, so the blue pill one is like the one that you basically seem to have grown up with your sex ed education, and then the white pill is maybe actually similar to like the counter you just gave to the black pill, which is like that all the problems are actually good things in the end. So what do you think blue pillars get right?
So blue pill here being kind of the normie, vaguely lefty, view.
Maybe like liberal sex ed approved education, what women would, as a group would not find objectionable advice on relationships.
Yeah, so I think one thing that the blue pill gets right is it's great for a harmonious society, right? I think that, if your goal is just to have a bunch of people living together peacefully, it's a decent thing for people to, work within the approved ways of interacting. And I think, I really like cities. I really like urban living. I think, it only works if you have some kind of code here. And also, it does flatten out some of the potential depth of relating. Uh, but yeah, what I think.
Oh, interesting. Could you say a little bit more about that? How the depth of relating is flattened by the megalopolis?
Yeah, so I'll use an analogy here. There's this sense in which, like, in a city, you don't necessarily really know your neighbors, right? Whereas in a small town, you probably get to know your neighbors pretty well. And, this is kind of because a city has a much wider variety of people. There's a lot of people, so you can't get to know everyone. You gotta, find sort of the people specific to you. And so you have a lot of people around you who are essentially strangers, and there's sort of a standard protocol for interacting. Stuff like if you're on the subway.
Sorry, that was not for you. That was not for you.
Gotcha. But yeah, so this protocol is stuff like if you're on the subway, don't stare someone in the eyes, right? And eye contact can be a very intimate thing, so this kind of does flatten things, but it's also a way to avoid conflict. And I think this is kind of similar to what the blue pill is doing, is, at the cost of losing some ways to interact where possibly it could end up being very positive some, a lot of people, really like some of these dynamics of relating. What the blue pill gets right is it avoids a lot of, harmful conflict or, ways that someone could override someone's preferences that, is really unpleasant.
Interesting. I think we're in the tail end here of the convo, but I want to leave it open to you. Since we're talking about relationships, what else is on your mind when it comes to relationships? Anything that we haven't covered?
I did have one thing from earlier. I said I'd have to think about how technology changes things, and one thing that occurred to me is I think we might see, more space for relationship anarchy just because of the ways that AI can help people introspect and, deal with each other, right? Like, if you have an AI coach who's infinitely patient and has a whole bunch of knowledge about lots of things, then you can ask about all these different ways to relate, and maybe that gives you some more room to explore that you wouldn't have had before. That might just be wishful thinking. It might be that people still mostly want the standard thing, even if they have access to these tools. But I think that's one thing that could possibly happen is people just get more introspective capability and more ability to figure out what they want for themselves. And there's this talk of like AI enabling a lot more solo founders of billion-dollar companies. And I think it might have similar effects on relationship entrepreneurship.
Hmm. Who do you think maybe stands to lose or be disrupted um, with coming technology and relationally? And who? Okay, well, let's start with who do you think was disrupted in the last wave of technology relationally?
So I'll have to think about how to answer who. I think, the last wave really disrupted sort of the notion of standardization. Like, I think it kind of fragmented things a little bit, and now, you don't get to assume as much that everyone is on the same page about how to relate. Um, it might be that, like, the church was disrupted.
I feel in some ways that also because of these like HR policy type concepts, like for the megalopolis, that teenagers are not having as much fun. Like teenage love was disrupted a bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I definitely like have that sense in my own life. I came of age during the Me Too movement, and I'm like a little bitter about all the messaging I got of like, if you're a man, be really careful about talking to a woman because, there might be this power dynamic that makes her feel unsafe. So, make sure you're, stepped back and kind of, they didn't say repress yourself, but that was absolutely the thing. And like I said, it's taken me a lot to unlearn that. And I think, it's kind of the messaging wasn't for me. If you're like a director in Hollywood, then yeah, you do want to be careful about hitting on your actresses who aren't necessarily in a position to refuse. But the messaging that came out was all men everywhere need to be careful about, making space for women. And I think this also denies women's agency, right? The messaging was like women are these infantile creatures who can't stand up for themselves, so you need to be careful not to hurt them. And I don't think that was good for, you know, either side of the equation, at least, for, kind of my circles where I think a lot of the men started out, already in this like kind of shy position and then got pushed farther along that.
Yeah. Um, there's like these topics about like how what percent of internet culture is downstream of some social media place. Um, I think a lot of American culture is actually downstream of things that happen in Berkeley, California, where you are. And like I think a lot of this kind of view of like men, need to be careful, blah blah blah. Those kind of power dynamic ideas probably came out of Berkeley, but like maybe 25, 30 years ago.
Huh.
Um, and
That's a
so I'm
really interesting
wondering,
take. Can you say more about that?
well, Berkeley is like, like Oppenheimer was working at UC Berkeley, and then like he was like part of these explicitly communist organizations in Berkeley, social clubs. I think, and like Bill Gates and Steve Wozniak would like go hang out in Berkeley, just to like go to like little computer club events. Like Berkeley is in the same way that people say Tumblr or 4chan or these places are like the actual origin source of the of evolution of internet culture. I think a lot of the origin source of American culture, not all of it, but like 20, 30%, a significant, an outsized proportion, comes from thinking in Berkeley. And, people think Berkeley is this kind of monoculture, but you have people like Curtis Yarvin in Berkeley, California. To me, that is like a signal that Berkeley is not a monoculture at all. It's actually a place where just people trying to change culture and be early on cultural
Yeah, I
impacts.
definitely would not call Berkeley a monoculture. I think the core thing of Berkeley is it attracts weirdos.
Yeah.
And so
So
you do get like a lot of different fringe ideas.
So if we
Uh,
want to have people be able to predict the future of relationship thinking, maybe 5, 10 years from now,
Maybe
We
you
probably
just
want
look
to,
at Berkeley today.
yeah. So like, what are some of the fringe ideas now in Berkeley about relationships? What is their reaction to like the whole Me Too era, which we can kind of say is like I like a whole decade maybe of that, labeling it under that, and like what is the now current Berkeley reaction to that?
Yeah. So I think, there's definitely some segments of Berkeley that are, still on that sort of standard blue pill thing. And then also, you've got some pushback to it. Like on one extreme, you've got in Berkeley the consensual non-consent orgies, right? That are kind of a strong pushback here where it's saying, look, men like, well, okay, they're not strictly gendered, but I'm going to treat them as gendered because they mostly are. I haven't been to one, mind you, but I have read about them. Uh, but yeah, so there are these orgies set up where it's like the women put on wristbands indicating default consent, and then the men don't have to ask; they just go ahead and do what they want, and it's kind of the opposite of like the standard consent culture, while also kind of being embedded in it, because it is sort of a container within broader consent culture of you consent at the door instead of in each interaction. But I think it's a really interesting thing. It's like acknowledging the ways in which people don't want to be always negotiating consent. You know, people, a lot of people want to just be assertive and push forward, and then on the other side, a lot of people want to just be
Be
pushed.
dominated.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that the current culture we have doesn't like by default allow any kind of experience like that anymore. And so
Yeah.
you need these consensual non-consent specific events where the woman says, dominate me. Just
Hmm.
stop asking.
Yeah. So I think, kink is really interesting, and I do expect ideas from various kink scenes to sort of diffuse into the cultural water supply over time.
What's can you think of any other ones that are kinks you've seen in Berkeley? Interesting approaches.
Not off the top of my head. If I think of something, I'll circle back to that. Um, but yeah, and then the other big one, like we've been talking about, is non-monogamy, which I think, again, I'm no historian, but I think probably has a lot of its roots here and definitely is spreading throughout culture more broadly.
It's just very hard for me to imagine the suburban couple in Ohio going for that. Being an Ohioan who knows a lot of suburban couples.
Yeah, but I think you know a lot of people in places where it isn't accepted are still doing various non-monogamy flavored things on the down low, right? Like you've got your classic monogamous couple, and then maybe they go to swinger events every few months or whatever,
Yeah.
right? And it's not like the public non-monogamous lifestyle, but it is sort of dipping their toes into non-monogamy and breaking out of the standard mold a little bit. And I think that's probably more common than some people realize.
How about as a final thing, you put out a bounty on an interesting new social or dating app you'd like to be created. It can sound magical
Mm.
too. Make it sound as magical as you want it to be. But what is like a piece of magic tech that, if someone made it, you're like, yes, I'll sign up for that, no doubt. Something better than cuties, I guess, because it's already exists.
Yeah. So I think, okay, if I'm just doing magic here, I think something could be like this app, you answer a bunch of questions, and then it finds someone it thinks you'd be a good match with, and then it doesn't tell you about them. It just tells both of you to go to a certain event, right? Because I think, the apps put a lot of pressure on things, and that pressure is not necessarily conducive to, letting a spark actually ignite, right? If you
And they
have,
don't
I
tell you
think,
who that person is.
yeah, they just say, you'll meet a bunch of people here, and I think you'll really get along with one of them, but I'm not going to tell you who.
It's like a Cinderella kind of moment.
Yeah, Jacob Falkovich has some interesting writing about this, where he says, like, the ideal AI matchmaker just kind of acts in the background and, engineers serendipity for you, and you can already live your life like this, right? You can, I'll find the blog post and send it to you after this, but basically the idea is act as if this AI is already doing this for you, right? Like everywhere you go, just be like, okay, the AI might have put my match here. I should be open to connection with everyone here. And, I should be like sleeping well so that I'm well rested when I meet my match. And, you can already live like this even though the app doesn't exist yet. And I think this is a great way to find love. It's just assume there's potential everywhere and see where that goes, rather than, saying like, okay, I've matched with this person on this app, we're going to meet up here, we're going to essentially interview each other to figure out whether this is going to be a good relationship. I think that kind of pressure and expectation can really dampen connection.
This was great. Maybe like 10, 20 episodes from now, we'll have you back on again. Also could do maybe live stuff at the next Love Symposium or something like that.
That'd be cool.
Yeah. Should do live stuff the next time. Anyway, I've missed you. It's great talking to you again.
Likewise, I've really enjoyed this chat.
Yeah. It's a good catch up.
Yeah.
All right.
Let me know when you're back in the Bay.
Well, everyone, this is Ari Zerner, and this is the Relationship Singularity podcast. Bye.